Hello and welcome to episode 35 of the Give Me the Remote podcast. It is the 22nd of March 2019. My name is John and I am joined by your co-host...
Sheridan.
Ooh, aren't you sounding perky tonight?
I'm always perky.
Always perky. And what do you got first for us tonight, Sheridan?
I think we should do Afterlife.
If you're watching this, then I'm not around anymore. But don't spiral, don't obsess. Keep going.
So how are you?
A good day is when I don't go around wanting to shoot random strangers in the face and then turn the gun on myself.
Bad then. Oh boy. Okay.
I've just actually realised all of the shows we're reviewing this episode are extremely depressing.
Yeah, now, for those who haven't observed a picture of me, I am basically a living Ricky Gervais impersonator. And...
Hadn't made that connection myself, but...
And a lot of this...
So hang on, where's your millions of dollars?
An impersonator. Impersonators aren't making millions of dollars. And this is describing... Admittedly, it's a character he's playing... Someone going through an enormous personal trauma, and...
His wife's died.
His wife's died.
It's not a spoiler.
No, I didn't have my wife die, but a few years ago, I went through a very enormous personal trauma, and a lot of the things that happened in this also happened to me, so Ricky Gervais is always too close to home for me. Like, I hated The Office for years, just because his David Brent character was just a little too close to me.
Oh my god.
I like to think I'm better than that, but I could see the worst of myself in it, and that's why I really had issues with it.
Folks, if there's no podcast next week, there's been an entire re-evaluation of this relationship, and I've moved out.
Wow, so no pressure. Anyway, so I found this hard viewing, although I will say it's not as hard viewing as The Office. I think he's learned to temper.
Well, I was going to say, you did just compare yourself to David Brent. I'm okay with Ricky Gervais, but that's a pretty horrible character.
I wouldn't say I'm like David Brent, but I would say I could see elements of the worst of me in him.
But that's what he does so well, though,
That's
Ricky
a hard
Gervais.
thing to see, though. Yeah.
He really does that thing of, oh my god, I'm not even a shit person. I'm just really, really mediocre. Like, he kind of, like, brings that out.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't mean that about you, honey.
No, well,
obviously, you're amazing.
I'm no more than mediocre in any way. Life teaches you that as you go along. So the setup of the story is it literally starts with a woman in hospital looking a lot like a cancer patient, talking to a camera.
Well, she is a cancer patient.
Yes, but it's visibly obvious, is my point.
Yeah.
And it turns out that she is dead and that she's talking to her husband who's still alive. And the whole series is set up around, is interspersed with these videos of her talking. And it's actually really important because it gives you a sense that before this tragedy hit him, he was a loving, functional human being.
Yeah. You definitely get the fact
And
that he
really
liked his life before.
But it's a very clever construct and really important because without it, you could just think, this guy is a total bastard.
Yeah. So basically his way of dealing with grief is he decides to kind of embark on this endeavour of saying and doing whatever he wants.
I mean, this is a concept that Ricky Gervais has played around with as a stand-up comedy for ages, which is, you know what, good things happen to bad people and bad things happen to good people, and if the bad things are going to happen, no matter how good you are, why not just let it all hang out?
Yeah, and he does it actually in his own personal Twitter account. If you follow that, he's very opinionated and frank with his views and kind of doesn't really care about consequences of them.
His Twitter persona is probably more of a bastard than his real life persona, I would say.
Perhaps,
I've never met him in
we
person,
don't know.
So, but he's led one of the more examined lives in human history. So
one of the things though I liked about this show is that, and he's really, really good at doing this, where it's not, his shows aren't drama shows, like obviously stand-up is ha-ha funny.
There's a lot of darkness in the stand-up, though.
yeah, there is a lot of darkness, but there's still laugh out loud moments. But
Mm.
I find that, like, I found with the shows since The Office, like Extras and Derek, a lot of them aren't laugh out loud funny. They're they're humorous, but there's like a real deep kind of emotional that I find them really tear jerky myself.
Yeah, he does the Hannah Gadsby thing where he plays with tension.
Yeah.
And then when he gives you a moment of relief from the tension, even if it's just someone slipping on a banana skin, it drags it all out of you.
And I mean, because Derek is, for me, a very problematic show because I really liked that show, but I mean, I did have problems
So
with...
Derek was about a person with some
Well,
sort of learning
an
difficulty,
undisclosed mental
possibly
disability.
a bit Down syndrome,
Yeah.
but not mentioned in a aged care facility. And I thought you might find it problematic, and I would agree there were problematic aspects of it, but that actually shone a light that is helping to explain right now in a lot of reform that people are pushing for in the disability sector.
I know, that's why I find it problematic, because I think it did some really important things and raised profile for both people in aged care facilities and people with disabilities, but you have the problem that he is an abled person playing a disabled role, and
Person with a disability, I think, I find is the preferred
Yeah.
nomenclature. Sheridan, you insensitive person.
I'm trying. Anyway, so
Sorry. I didn't mean to make light of that.
that's
Yeah, I did.
that's so anyway, but those I find, and Extras as well. Extras is just an amazing show about friendship and fame and what happens to people when they start, go on a quick escalation of making money and get famous. What that does to the people around you, and how that's quite a shallow existence, and it's quite a heart sort of felt show. I find his writing to be, it's sort of, well, I'm struggling to put it into words, but it's very emotive.
Yeah, and I
mean, I was bloody bawling my eyes out during a couple of scenes in this.
Now, I should also note that not only do I look like Ricky Gervais, but my dog looks like Ricky Gervais's dog.
Actually, that is true. The dog in this show does look like our dog.
There's a moment where he's close to rock bottom and he's walking the dog in a park, and it's just him and the dog, and they're not bothering anyone, and someone comes over and tells him off for having the dog off leash in an on leash area.
It's all happened to us.
Well, yeah.
It's all happened to big dog owners.
Well, I don't know. I mean, for me, there was a moment when George, my old Kelpie, was on his last legs, and we all knew it was pretty much his last walk, and he knew it too. And we sat down in a park on a bench, and an old woman came up and demanded that she be allowed to use the bench, which broke every rule of park etiquette. Once you're sitting on the bench, it's yours. But no, she was a special human being, and George and I left the park. Anyway, it's just a moment of complete surrender when you're in those moments of crisis and people are being horrible. And there are scenes where he uses the conceit of the show to say things that we all wish we could say as well. Not even just mean things, like when he's hit up by the charity muggers in the town square, and he tells them no, and then he deliberately calls out, "Oi, Four Eyes," and hands the money to a different charity fundraiser who's not hassling people on the street. I thought that was great.
Yeah, I mean,
it's like, woo!
Like, I don't think he's one of these comedians that has a problem with people being politically correct. So this is not the point I'm trying to make with this. But his comedy is actually really good at pointing out just the kind of occasional shitness that we all have as being humans. Like, you say inappropriate things, you do crappy things. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. It doesn't mean... He's really good at drawing that out.
Yeah.
Because you feel empathy towards it. You're like, yeah, I've done douchebaggy things like that too.
Oh, a huge part of his thing is he will do terrible things, and in the show he does do terrible things. And
it's not about like that being okay. It's just that's kind of like part of the human condition.
Yeah, and in a perfect world, I wouldn't want to condone terrible behaviour, although I will confess I have behaved terribly at times in the past and probably will again in the future, and it draws out some terrible behaviour and at least makes you think, okay, I can try and do better next time.
Yeah.
Destigmatizing sex workers. I thought that was one of the things it did in the show.
That's what I mean. Because then he does these things that are really surprising, and you're like, this guy's like a pretty privileged white guy, and he does some stuff like destigmatizing sex workers, and you're like, you're awesome. And then he kind of does other things like plays the role of a disabled person. You're like, I don't know if that's cool.
While also shining light into the plight of disabled people in aged care facilities.
But also,
in a way that no Four Corners expose was ever going to do.
Maybe, but there is something that does happen in this show that I think as Australians we do need to acknowledge. And that is...
The Scoop by NITV, not the ABC.
Yes.
Because they stole it.
So...
Again, more theft! Where will it end?
During... well, it's in a lot of... It's actually a main... So he spends a lot of time...
in his living room.
On his couch, because he's a depressed person. He's there a lot.
Hey, we spend a lot of time on our couch. You don't need to be depressed to spend a lot of time on your couch.
True. And behind him on the couch is a very large and what appears to be quite obviously a Western Desert painting.
I would say Indigenous Australian...
what some people would call a dot painting.
Yeah. It is in the style of an Australian Indigenous painting.
It is.
And it is in an English living room, so it is out of context already.
Yep. And it's massive.
Well, it'd be out of context in our living room as well.
Well, because it would cost thousands of freaking dollars. Like,
not
look, if anyone wants to, like, donate a genuine piece of Indigenous art, we will gladly have it. But I won't take fake.
Oh, you're not willing to pay the Indigenous people for their art, huh? You're just stealing again.
That's actually not true. I have purchased things from Indigenous artists.
You're just panhandling.
But I don't have enough money to afford that giant canvas.
Okay, sorry. Let's get back to the story.
It's not about want. Mm-hmm. It's about ableness. Anyway. So the story we're going back. We're making it about us, John. This is not what it's about.
It's not about Ricky Gervais either.
No.
But, yeah.
An NITV journalist put a call out because he had seen this painting in the show and thought, oh my god, this is amazing.
How good
Let's
is it?
try and find
artwork.
out who this artist is.
Would have made a good story.
So put a call out, nothing came back. So he did a reverse Google image search and found out that it was painted by an English artist who basically does paintings, and I'm doing like air quotes now, in the
Very
style...
effective in the podcast
I know.
format.
Look, it is when you do the verbal. In the style of... And then, like, I don't know, Van Gogh, Aboriginal art. She basically does, like, in the style of for every type of genre of art you can imagine. So, I mean, this is a... I'm going to swear now. This is a fucking atrocious example of...
Cultural appropriation.
Not even cultural appropriation, cultural exploitation.
Yes.
And is not cool. And Ricky Gervais should freaking apologise and donate some money.
Oh, you're deciding how Ricky Gervais should spend his money now.
Well, he just needs to make that shit right.
Now, do you think it's possible that this is Ricky Gervais's clever way of drumming up media for the show?
No.
And trolling, and maybe one of his publicists called up NITV and said, hey, why don't you look into that artwork? It's going to be a good story.
No, John, I don't. I don't think that's what happened at all. Because the story is that this woman was approached. And
she
he's...
She made it especially for the show. They said, we want something that looks like Indigenous art, but isn't. They deliberately went that far, did they?
No, but there's been no comment from them about it.
Yeah.
Like, it's not okay. Like, I don't know why you're defending this.
I'm not defending it.
Well, it kind of sounds like you are.
I've been part of media beat-ups like this.
Well, if they're part of that media beat-up, their silence is pretty bullshit as well. Because there's a lot of Indigenous people. There's a lot of Indigenous people that... And actually just people like me that think this is rubbish.
But at least more people are now aware of the issue. So that's
like people like us, like the majority of people...
and everyone who's listening to this.
Yeah, I think...
And everyone else who's picked up the story elsewhere, which is probably a lot more people who will listen to this, I grant you, but...
Fake Indigenous art is a huge issue.
And is exploiting a desperately poverty-stricken group of artists.
No, it's not even about that. It's actually that it's exploiting an entire culture.
Yeah.
and it's not right, and
No.
it's not fair, and
Okay.
it shouldn't be allowed to go on without being called out.
No, and I think given that we've now spent a third of the time
I'm
talking about the show, talking about this, I feel that we've done good service to it.
Yeah, no, so I'm taking a whole star off. Just
Whole
for that.
star off just for the painting. Is there anything else you want to say about the show?
I actually really liked. He plays a local journalist for a local newspaper.
Which also ties back into the
This
life
is like,
of
John's
John.
like very torn. Former local newspaper journalist, extremely torn, and highly empathetic to Ricky Gervais's Indigenous
I wouldn't say
art
necessarily
stealing.
empathetic. He just, I mean, basically he's a fat dude, roughly my age, with a beard. So he always looks and sounds like me.
I think what it did highlight, though, because we don't have a lot of local papers left in Australia like the one he worked at. I don't even know if they have local papers really left in the UK like he worked at.
Oh no, there's local rags like the last thing holding on. It's the mid-tier stuff that's going, but they're running on the smell of an oily rag.
They certainly can't afford 3 metre by 3 metre real or Indigenous art. I can tell you that.
No, the house he was living in, I was like, either the ex-wife, the dead wife, was loaded,
Yeah.
or there's no way he was affording that on his
Local journalism salary.
Yeah.
But it brought about, I thought it was a nice message about the importance of local news, that local news isn't about finding some sort of hard-hitting story, which often it can be, about, councils and things.
I literally spent 15 years of my life doing hyperlocal news.
Yeah, well, look, I'm going to give my opinion and then
Okay,
you can give
sure.
yours, and we'll see where we align. And obviously there's a really important aspect of local news that it does hold organisations like local councils and large businesses to account, because they're actually on the ground in their community. But it also highlighted that local news is actually about community and just telling stories from within community. And as someone who's worked as a curator, especially in local social history, those stories that you get from local newspapers are actually really important decades down the track to telling a story about what a local community is like. And obviously they are biased by the journalists and the paper that publishes them, but they are really, really significant to our social fabric, and that has been taken away from us.
A subreddit is no substitute, I'll give you that.
Yeah, like that. No one's archiving the subreddits.
Yeah, they are.
Look, they're archiving some aspects of it, but not every single page. And also, they're not written by people that have the. Look, I know everyone rags on journalists, but ultimately, journalists do have a code of ethics that they comply to. Yeah, I know you laugh, but the people on Reddit have they've got nothing. So there's no accountability to those writers on Reddit.
I would say anytime anyone is telling a story, you need to ask yourself where the money is coming from and going to.
Yeah, but you can't even ask that on Reddit. It's just like some rando in their bedroom.
There's people still have reputation.
I'm not saying it's not important or relevant, but I'm just saying that
I'm not arguing
we've
that either
really
way.
lost a huge aspect of the historical preservation of our social history in the loss of local newspapers.
Yes.
Do you disagree?
No.
Okay, so tell us your version now.
No, that's okay.
I just articulated it, didn't I?
Yeah, look, I'm going to give this 5 stars, even though the Indigenous art was stolen. And also, even though the whole last episode was a terribly clunky, awful piece of writing where he goes around loving everyone.
I kind of like. I mean, I like the. To be honest, I like the resolution of a show.
Yeah, I like that it was just a thing. And
This is
done.
one season. You're done.
Yeah.
Like I don't need. There's no more.
Mm-hmm. And what we're basically figuring out is that 3 to 4 hours of storytelling is actually all we want in a story.
Yeah, it was. Look, I'm gonna give it. I told you I'd take a star off for the Indigenous art theft, and I will. So I'm gonna give it 4 stars.
Oh, would have been a perfect score.
I can't abide by, and that's a crap thing to do. Is just take a star off. We should do more, but
Anyway, also, but the show's gotten to 20 minutes of us talking about it, and it wouldn't have done that without the theft of Indigenous art. So I don't know what the message is there. Please don't steal Indigenous art. Just pay those terribly, desperately poor.
Well, not all of it. Not everyone's desperately poor, but it's just a matter of that you pay people to tell their story in a culturally appropriate and important manner. They're the artists of those stories, and
Sure. Thank you, Sharon. Okay. So what's next?
I'm going to do solo review now.
Oh.
The Disappearance of Madeleine McCann.
The entire McCann case has become a phenomenon.
If you made a dozen movies out of this, nobody would believe them.
I've done thousands of cases. With the Madeleine case, I've seen the worst things a human being can see. The worst.
I was off sick with gastro, as we all were in this house. It's been a fun week, folks.
The dogs have loved it.
Yeah, they have. There was actually a really weird night where Orwell had eaten a giant bone and I had gastro, and we just kept waking up and going to the toilet. Our separate toilets, obviously, not the same one. And there was a little sense of sort of unity there between me and the dog.
Which looks a lot like Ricky Gervais's dog.
It does. So, for anyone who doesn't know, Madeleine McCann was a 3-year-old child that was abducted in 2007 from a resort in Portugal. Her parents were on holidays with a bunch of other friends. They were all very affluent British people. And Madeleine McCann has never been found, and there have been absolutely no leads in the disappearance, except beyond a few. I mean, there was one of the interesting things about this documentary is they do interview one of the main suspects that occurred at the time, which was a British guy that was living next door who was helping them as a translator. I'd never seen him interviewed before. It was kind of interesting to see him interviewed because he is kind of an odd person. So you can see why maybe he was a bit suspicious, but basically it came out that he had absolutely nothing to do with it at all. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, this documentary is kind of an example of where true crime is going wrong.
Okay. Now, just take me back and I guess take the listeners as well. I don't know the McCann case as well as I possibly should.
Yeah, I've read 2 books on this. So.
It's always been out there. So there's always been a suspicion the parents sold her into slavery.
That story is not one that I am aware of that has any credibility.
I'm not saying it's got credibility. It's just always been a suspicion that's lurked around the case.
So the most credible theories around the parents' involvement. So her father is a cardiac surgeon, I think, and the mother is a GP. They are extremely affluent people.
So why don't they leave her alone in a hotel room?
First what I'm saying is there's no motive for them to sell the daughter into slavery. So they were on holidays with a bunch of other doctors, and they would regularly during this holiday go down to the resort restaurant, which was in line of sight of the apartment where the children were sleeping, and have dinner. And with the group of them would one adult from the group every 20 minutes would get up and check on their own children, and usually all of the other children.
So someone dropped the ball.
No, they did the 20-minute check.
Right.
It was in between one of the 20-minute checks that she was apparently abducted. So the most widespread theory of the parents' involvement was that the parents drugged the children to keep them to sleep, and that somehow...
Which, that does happen quite a lot.
Yeah, but you can't... I don't think you can overdose your child on Phenergan.
Hey, I wasn't mentioning drugs.
Seems to be the one that all our friends that have children go to.
Right. They were doctors though, so I guess they had access to better drugs, but also should have known quite well how to dose them. Anyway, yeah.
And also, their doctors kind of assume that they're probably I'm going to put it out there and say they're probably reasonably risk averse and probably weren't overdosing their children with something that was too dangerous. They'd probably just give their kids Phenergan, wouldn't they, like a normal parent?
Well, just they've got access to better stuff.
Anyway, so the most widespread theory of their involvement is that they drugged drugged the children to get them to sleep, and that somehow accidentally overdosed Madeleine,
And then decided to cover it up.
Decided to cover up. But I mean, I've read a lot about this case. My personal view is there is absolutely no way on the timing of the checks that the family were doing, and also the fact that if they were to try and cover up this thing, would involve a conspiracy of at least 3 other couples, all of whom are, I'm not saying it makes you less likely to cover something up, but they were all doctors and quite professional people. Like, why? I mean, we wouldn't do that. Like, if our friend came back and was like, "Oh my God, my child's died, I've drugged her,"
and be like, well, we better call the police.
But no one would do.
No,
like, it's ridiculous.
It's also, we better call the ambulance because
Exactly.
we're not sure the child's dead.
It makes absolutely no sense on any kind of understanding of human behaviour. Even if you could think that the McCanns could cover it up between themselves, in order to cover it up, they had to involve the other couples.
Yeah, and also, I mean, when you've got 2 people and one of them has accidentally killed the child, there would normally be a lot of retribution in that couple, which would be hard to contain.
But also, with all these other couples that are with them on holidays, you're not going to be like, I'm going to risk my own personal, not only just liberty and freedom, but my professional practice to cover up for this stuff up that my mates made. It doesn't make any sense. Anyway, so, anyway, I'm seeing that this is why this is the problem with this. Well, the problem with this show is it gives...
The local police were always very suspicious of the parents, though.
The local police completely stuffed the investigation, basically. They didn't... They didn't treat the area as a crime scene when it was first reported.
Yep.
They didn't do proper forensic evidence sweeps of the area.
Didn't they bring dogs in that
they brought those dogs in
blood and
7 weeks or something after the abduction, and this is a huge thing that's made out in this documentary.
And I'm always suspicious that the dogs will indicate often where the handler is cueing them to as well.
So they brought in a cadaver dog and a blood dog. So a dog that can test for find dead bodies or where a dead body has been, and a dog that can find human blood.
And I'm not aware of any court that takes these dogs as a missing.
No, and actually in this documentary, and this is the frustrating thing about this documentary, is it actually does this really annoying thing of doing a whole entire episode about how, oh my God, the blood and cadaver dogs highlighted on in the McCann apartment and in the McCann's hire car, they must be guilty. And then 3 episodes down the track, the handler of the dogs is saying, these dogs are not used as evidence. These dogs are only used to start or as a basis of inquiry. So they would never be evidence of anything of themselves.
Yeah.
It would just be, we should start doing more forensic analysis of this spot where the dog indicated.
Yeah, and certainly I know that drug-sniffing dogs are infamous for the fact that it's mostly the suspicions of its handler that the dog then indicates on, not its own sense of the drugs.
Yeah. And one of the blood dogs indicated in their hire car, which the McCanns had hired weeks after Madeleine McCann was abducted.
Oh, right. Okay.
And
that's a stretch,
Portugal
isn't it?
police came up with this theory that they kept Madeleine's body in a refrigerator for weeks while these people were under intense police investigation. It's absolutely ludicrous.
So you drunk the McCain Kool-Aid? Is that where we're at?
Well, I don't think it's the McCain Kool-Aid. I mean, I'm not saying that...
But it's McCann.
McCain.
Okay, yeah.
Madeleine McCann.
All right.
I don't think it's impossible that they had anything to do with it. I just think on the timeline that's been established, it's highly improbable.
So what do you think happened?
I think she was abducted from the apartment.
By who?
Well,
and why?
Well, there are a lot of theories about sex traffickers in the area that were like a pedophile ring that it was operating.
She was a very
in the
photogenic
area.
baby, so you know.
I know, I find this very, I mean, this comes up in the documentary a lot where they talk about just an attractive child. I just find that so cringeworthy. Anyway, I mean, it's just hard to relate to that kind of motivation,
All
I
right,
guess.
so as a documentary, it sounds like it's very long. There are multiple
It's
episodes.
extremely bloated. It goes,
Yeah.
it's 8 parts, they're 1 hour
It says that they
each.
could have knocked it out in an hour.
There's absolutely nothing new in this. Nothing new for anyone who's read anything of substance.
Yep.
I think it's borders on being somewhat exploitative at times as well.
Yeah.
It does these weird kind of setups, like with the dogs, saying let's set up this kind of aha moment for them being guilty, and then like 3 episodes down the track discounts it, but in a not a very
I mean, I feel
appropriate way.
I feel for a documentary team that's sold an 8-hour concept to Netflix and then discovers the story isn't there.
But that they would have known this though when they started, because they have honestly they have everything that's ever been written.
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting point about the documentary form versus journalism. Is I've worked for some terrible editors, and a bad editor is one where you pitch a story and say, I think this thing's happening and I want to go write a story about it, and they say, okay, go do that. And then you get halfway through the story and you realise the story isn't what you thought it was. And a good journalist and a good editor writes the real story.
Well, and that's actually draws a point out that I hadn't thought of it before you said that. The real story in this is actually the media circus that occurred around them and the amount of misinformation that was perpetrated in the press about this abduction that never got corrected. They kind of start touching on it a bit. Like there's a couple of journalists from Portugal that say we feel like the Portuguese police were feeding us misinformation, and now we feel really guilty because we basically made out to the world that these parents were guilty of abducting their child or killing their child. So it touches on that, but to me that's the story that should have been told, is actually how the media kind of interfered with this investigation and didn't actually interrogate what was the real issue, which was the crappy police investigation that was happening.
Yeah, but when you've got crappy police doing a crappy investigation and then briefing the media to cover their own backsides, you're going to get a lot of terrible outcomes.
Yeah. And it was this weird thing, like when she first got abducted.
It might have been the chief of... I'm not accusing the chief of police of but it might have been someone powerful within the local society who was actually responsible for the abduction. And then it gets almost impossible for someone outside.
Well, I mean, that is a
community
little
to
bit
unpack it.
hinted at with this child pedophile ring that's kind of theorised about.
Yeah, but what I was trying to finish with was that when a journalist spends a week working on a story and comes back with a different story than the one they pitched, that's maybe $500 worth of staff time on the line. But when you start trying to make a documentary, that's not millions, but hundreds of thousands of dollars on the line, and it gets a lot harder to go back to the person who commissioned it and say, actually, this story's really different. I guess that's when you just... Well, like I said, I've worked with editors who are really good when you come back with a different story, and I've worked with editors who are absolute pigs about it. And that's when there's $500 on the line, not hundreds of thousands on the line.
Yeah. I mean, the McCanns were never involved in the making of this. They objected to it on the basis that there's an active police investigation underway.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, there still is. It's a horrible story. But I'm sure, and as Australians, I don't think we kind of realise that for a lot of British people, especially, middle and upper class British families, they spend their holidays doing this kind of thing. They go to these resorts in Europe, and the kids go to kids club. It's I think, kind of a visceral experience for a lot of them, and quite unbelievable that their children weren't safe while they were doing this.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a little bit of latent racism in the blonde-haired, blue-eyed little girl and the swarthy local authorities.
Yeah, and well, actually, there is some stuff that's brought out in the show that there were other children abducted from the same town that were Portuguese children, and they have basically had not even no media attention, but no police attention to their abductions. And one of the children...
I would say don't take your kids on a holiday to this town in Portugal. What's the name of the town?
La Perouse, I think.
Yeah, right.
I mean, one of the children comes...
Hot tip
There's a
from
very
Give Me That
horrible moment in it. There was a huge bust of a pedophile ring in Europe, and this woman whose child was abducted from the same town, Portuguese woman, goes and looks through all the photos of the faces of the children that they take from the videos of the child porn that they seized, and she sees the face of her own child. Yeah. And so she still hasn't got her child back, but she knows her child has been subjected to what can only be, you know, we can't even describe the kind of trauma that you can't even imagine.
I think let's not go there in this podcast.
But yeah, it's a very... It's an awful moment where you realise there's a complete inequity and injustice, because the McCanns are getting all this attention and this woman is getting none of it.
The attention did them no good. The attention just destroyed their lives further. I believe they split up.
No, they're still together.
Okay, my apologies. But the media attention did not bring their daughter back. And
well, I mean, I don't know what it's like to be the McCanns, and you, like as a cardiac surgeon, what happens like when you see a new patient? Well, they would know who they are.
Yeah, well, so they'd lose some business and they'd gain some business, and it's hard to know for sure how that works.
I think, I mean, the British community around them has, you know, embraced them.
Oh, the British newspapers were...
No, but their actual community has said, there's absolutely no way these people did this.
Okay, so how many stars for this thing?
Oh, well, look, I mean, I've just basically rabbited on about the actual story itself and not this documentary, which is cheesy.
Bring it back, but, yeah.
I know, but that's also the problem. It's cheesy, it's exploitative, it does correct a little bit of the record, but there's absolutely nothing new. It's ridiculously bloated. I'm going to give it 2 stars.
Yeah, right. And no faked Indigenous artworks in there at all?
No.
No. Wow, otherwise it would have been a 1-star effort.
Yeah, well, actually, I think I would take double off.
It would have been 0 stars. Okay. Alright then. So what's next?
Leaving Neverland.
Oh, this is another happy story.
It's a really bloody depressing episode.
Everybody wanted to meet Michael or be with Michael. And then he likes you.
I was 7 years old. Michael asked, do you and the family want to come to Neverland?
Yeah, so everyone with a brain and an eyeball knew that Michael Jackson was doing horrible things to children.
Well, I'm just going to put this out there.
And we all kind of hoped that maybe he was just a weird dude, but we all kind of knew that it was worse than that.
I'm going to put it out there that, you know, going through my Facebook feed, there's a lot of people who still think after this that he's innocent.
Yeah.
And look...
Apparently his Spotify listens are going through the roof. Like, radio stations are pulling his music and people are just playing it more and more and more.
So...
But, you know, in Australia we currently have the spectacle of Cardinal George Pell's been found guilty of child sex abuse, and huge sections of the media and community are just denying it. They don't believe the finding of the court.
Yeah.
And it's the same, just don't want to believe it stuff going on here.
Look, I can give you my rant about how child sexual abuse is an example of a patriarchal society that puts men's sexual needs above everything else, but I won't. So this story follows 2 of Michael Jackson's alleged victims, who I have to say personally I believe.
No, I will say that the 2 of them are... It wasn't like the documentary makers found them separately. They've been engaged in litigation against the Michael Jackson estate. So they are close, and they have definitely spoken to each other about their stories before.
Both of them have given evidence saying that they weren't sexually abused.
Yeah.
So it's a 2-part documentary. Well, that's how it's presented to us. For some reason, I feel as in the US it might have been presented as a 4-part, but to us on our streaming service, which at the moment is only available on
10.
Gem, On 10.
10 Play. Network TV on their replay service is how we watch it.
So it's a little strange for us. We didn't get it through their kind of 10 Play's basically rubbish. So
and the most horrible ads, which were grossly incongruous.
Oh my god! So actually, sorry, we need to talk about this.
Mm.
So obviously, whatever advertising packages that are occurring for our ordinary network television in Australia
on their replay services,
they're getting bundled up in some like sort of extras package, because what happens is you get like the same ad 2 or sometimes 3 times in a row, not in the episode, but like literally like
over and over
one
again.
after the other.
You certainly remember the ad very well once you watched it 3 times, though.
And during this documentary was a Woolworths ad trying to sell us apples with what I can only describe as
Juicy.
the
Grab some juicy apples.
creepiest freaking farmer, that when you're just in the middle of listening to a very detailed description of how Michael Jackson sexually abused a child, a really chipper farmer pops up and tells you that you need to grab a handful of apples. Now, can I just say something? Who grabs a handful of apples? I have only ever, in my life, grabbed one apple at a time. But apparently...
Now, it should be noted, Sheridan has very small hands, and people that are more naturally gifted...
come on. How many times have you grabbed a handful of apples? Hey, Mum, I'm just going to school. I'm getting myself a handful of apples. Here, John, have a handful of apples for your morning tea. Well, it doesn't happen.
I don't like apples that much, but I can easily fit 2 apples in my hands.
But have you ever wanted to?
I just don't like apples that much.
Anyway.
Sorry, Tasmania.
I really like apples.
Okay. I guess I should buy some.
But it's just one at a time.
Yeah, okay.
Anyway, so not only is
that was 3 minutes of our listeners' lives.
But this Woolworths, just stop. Just get whoever's in selling these ad buys or buying these ad buys.
Yeah.
Just stop. It was really creepy.
So we had to watch it on an unconventional format, which we did not appreciate the monetization model at all.
So anyway, sorry, as I was saying before I went into this, is it's basically split into 2 parts. And one part is about the relationship these 2 children developed with Michael Jackson and his not only family but extended entourage, and the abuse that they suffered. And I would say the first episode is probably some of the most traumatic...
graphic descriptions of child sexual abuse you're ever going to encounter.
It's very difficult.
Outside of a courtroom. Yeah.
And then the second episode is about them telling people about the abuse and the court cases that were occurring when they were sort of starting to tell people what had happened to them, and explain that, you know, they had been covering up for Michael for a long time because they were
been pressured into it. And
I'm not saying, sorry, when I say cover up, I'm not trying to give any blame, but they were trying to explain why they
had lied.
Did that, yeah.
And I found that very convincing.
I agree. I was very.
I've got to say, I was relatively across the concept of what Michael Jackson had been doing with his kids, and everything that they were saying just tracked with that. What I found new, and I'm not saying it's worse, but it was new, was the extent to which basically they were in what we would think of as an adult sexual relationship with Michael Jackson, but they were 8 years old. And then he was playing them off with his other favourites. And that is a game that is very hard to play even for a 30-year-old. When you've got a lover who is playing those games with you. It would be hurtful to a 30-year-old, and there is no way an 8-year-old can process or deal with or understand, particularly when it's an illegal relationship that they've been, promised to sworn to silence over.
I think one of the...
And they really brought that out, the whole suddenly Michael Jackson's got some other kid in the car, in the limo next to him and being photographed. They're like, oh, I'm on the shelf now?
Yeah. I think one of the things that this documentary does that is not spoken about very openly in society, especially amongst people that haven't been abused, is that, especially with child sexual abuse, those children are actually being seduced by the abuser, and they, I'm not saying they consent because they can't consent, but at the time of the abuse, those children feel like willing participants because the abuser has such power and influence over them that they make them feel that what's happening is okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think the issue is that they're in a process of seduction and they might feel willing to that. They're definitely not feeling great about the sexual part of it that suddenly gets introduced to them out of the blue. But in terms of let's hang out with Michael Jackson, this incredibly famous
but what I'm
dude,
sort of saying
yeah.
is I think people think about child sexual abuse as being a because it is a violent act and it's never not a violent act, but they think of it as like a physical violent act of I'm going to hold this child down and do this thing to them. But that's not what happens.
It doesn't always happen that way.
And it sometimes does happen that way. But this is something that no one wants to talk about.
But also, most kids are abused by a member of their family or their scout leader or their priest.
People that they know.
Yeah.
And that
and when it's Michael Jackson and you're a kid and you think Michael Jackson's the coolest, most amazing guy in the world, that's a somewhat different abuse dynamic, I'm saying.
But what I'm saying, it shines a kind of light on the fact that these relationships are extremely complex, and the reason why children don't come out and tell people about the abuse is because they don't want to lose the affection that they have with their abuser.
Yeah.
And that, that's actually a really important story and a really important part of understanding what sexual abuse is about. And that I think this documentary kind of does that and would bring that story out to a mainstream audience.
Yeah, look, I found this extremely unpleasant to watch.
It's really hard going.
But it probably is one of the more important things to watch.
And also how he groomed the entire family. Yeah. Like, he manipulated the entire family to think that it... Because all these people that I've seen people on Facebook, how could you let your child sleep in the same bed as an adult man?
Because he doesn't start with saying, I'm taking your child to bed. He starts with, hey, why doesn't the whole family come to Hollywood? And why don't you hang out in a hotel with me?
I'll hang out and watch movies all night with you and your sister, and nothing happens. And then it just becomes a slow sort of thing. Oh, Michael, he's just in there watching movies with my child. He's a really nice man. Mm-hmm. But then it turns into something else, and that's the grooming.
Yeah.
And they really explain how that happens. And I really do hope people watch this. And I know people don't want to believe it, but I hope people watch it and do believe it, because it's horrible.
I find with this show that it doesn't tell anything that we shouldn't have already known. But it does tell it in a way that makes it real.
Yeah, I mean, you can tell, especially with Safe Chuck. What's his name? I can't remember his first name.
Mm-hmm. James, I think. But
I mean, he's a really damaged guy.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's the damage they do, and the way it colours and messes up all of their future relationships is the real part of the crime that I don't think our current sentencing guidelines actually account for, that long reverberation of damage to these poor people. But,
I mean, these are people that have been normalised into thinking that having sexual relationships with adults when you're a child, and like both of them actually say, when I really realised when it was wrong was when I had my own child. Mm-hmm. And they just looked at their own child and was like, how can that's horrible.
Yeah.
So that's how normal it was for them, though.
The interviews with these two men's partners is probably the saving grace of this piece as well, in that their reactions to it and their trying to deal with the damage done to their partners is a very, very important part of this documentary. Yeah.
But look, these aren't the only two people that have come out and accused Michael Jackson of sexually abusing them. There's now at least 7 credible people that have accused him of that, and I just think he's a child molester and we need to stop celebrating him.
Yeah, I always struggled with the popularity of Michael Jackson. I never quite got it. I mean, I can remember being a kid and everyone knowing the words to the Thriller intro, but, you know, there's...
You're also sus on his vitiligo.
Yeah. As someone who also has vitiligo, the way he described what he was doing did not match up with my own experience of it. But who knows? Maybe he had a different sort of a classier, wealthier sort of vitiligo. Yeah. Anyway, look, I think how many stars?
I mean, this is really.
I can't knock a star off it. I mean, it's not. There are issues with it, but it's so powerful, it's so raw, it's so important.
Well, that's what I mean. The rawness of it. I have never seen anything like it.
Yeah, and I would say to anyone who is knocking the credibility of the two guys giving the interviews, I do not believe they're that good actors. If they were that good actors, they'd be.
Well, and I certainly don't believe the whole family are that good actors.
Yeah, if they were that good actors, then they'd be winning Academy Awards as actors. But if they're just people
and this
telling
whole
the story, then
rubbish
this is
of
true.
Well, if what they're saying is true, then they were lying when they gave the evidence. Then that makes them liars. It's like, well, they were either lying then or they're lying now. Like, you can't kind of use that as an example.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, I mean, Jackson's defense lawyers were highly paid lawyers who managed to, demolish small children. Well done them.
And interestingly, the Jackson estate is trying to sue Netflix.
Yeah.
For apparently a parent company or something of Netflix purchased a concert screening of a Jackson concert in, I think, 1996 that had a non-disparagement clause.
Right.
And they are trying to argue that contract has been breached by the airing of this show, which is 23 years later.
Look,
and that is just friggin' ridiculous.
Look, I mean, the Jackson estate, the people who work there don't bear personal responsibility for the crimes of Michael Jackson, and they are simply...
Well, to be fair, some of them might.
Some of them might, but mostly they're just people trying to do their job and do the best for the organisation they're in. So they're going to be the last ones who believe.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that at least it's a business as big as Netflix that can hire lawyers just as good as the Jackson Estate's lawyers, and they can get some sense of justice. But if you've got less than 100 million in the bank, justice is not for you. Anyway, I'm going to give it 5 stars, not because I enjoyed watching it, but just because I can't bear to take a star off it for any reason.
Yeah, I'm going to give it 5 stars as well, and just acknowledge the bravery of these two people. Like, I know a lot of people talk about that they're trying to just get money and make money, but I don't believe that any kind of money is worth what is probably happening to them and being said about them at the moment.
No, and the sad thing is there are going to be some very unkind people who will mock them for the things they've spoken about on the camera here. And I wish we didn't live in that world, but we do. So, yeah. Okay, moving to the conclusion of the show. Thank you very much for listening to us.
Next week will be way more chipper.
Yeah, hopefully. Although we did give...
Watch a little Disney movie or something.
Oh, there's so many new movies on streaming we need to get through this weekend.
I've already watched one.
Which one?
Is it called Triple Kingdom? No. Something with Ben Affleck. Wasn't that great? Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. Anyway, we've had no emails this month, but do please send them through to gmtrpodcast@gmail.com or leave comments on various social media platforms. We will hopefully be back next week instead of leaving you hanging for 3 weeks. So thanks very much, folks, and you'll be hearing from us soon.
Thanks, folks.